get it finished up tonight, but let's look into some things here. Revelation chapter 12, verse 6 says, "And a woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." If you will, go ahead and give me my next slide here. I think we'll pick up give me one more. One more? Nope. All right. I might have put it in the wrong spot. Go ahead and just take me back a slide, and I'll go ahead and give you the reference that we're looking for. It'll be Job 38, 22 through 23. Job. I thought it might be past those pictures, so I may have put it on the wrong side may have put the pictures on the wrong side. Go ahead and give me one more there. Past the pictures, keep going. There it is. So we'll have to backtrack to the pictures here in a little bit. All right, but there's your reference there. I just put it on the wrong side of it, and that's fine. Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38. So you find the book of Psalms, go back one book. Job chapter 38, we'll look at verses 22 and 23. Keeping in mind the context here is the children of Israel back out into the wilderness during the tribulation. So what you saw in the book of Exodus has come back around again. Job chapter 38, verses 22 and 23. "Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail? Which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war." You make special note of that phrase there, against the time of trouble. You could make a reference there to the time of Jacob's trouble or the tribulation. And so you got a passage on this, and it's subtly tucked away where your scholars won't touch it. They won't see it unless they believe what they read. And as they read it, Job is a picture of the tribulation. Now you're probably aware of that. You get here long enough, you hear things repeated over and over. Job has 42 chapters. 42 chapters representing 42 months. 42 months being 3.5 years. Job is on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. That's how long his 3 friends sit with him, is for 7 days and 7 nights. Now, you can make some exegesis about that and talk about it, but I think it'd been far better if after they sat there with him for 7 days and 7 nights, at the end of it they'd just gone home, but they sat around and talked with him and ruined their own testimonies. And so that 7 days and 7 nights, that could possibly be one for each year of the tribulation, if the tribulation does come out to be 7 years. Job is in the land of Uz. That's where Job lives, and that's where Israel will be in the tribulation. Job is persecuted by the devil, as Israel will be, and Job is rescued by God at the end, as Israel is in Revelation chapter 19. So there's a lot of similitudes between the book of Job, the person of Job, and the Jews in the tribulation. Now here where we are in Job chapter 38 and verses 22 and 23, he mentions 2 things here. He mentions the treasures of the snow and treasures of the hail. And what's interesting about that is that you've been told over and over again up to this point that he's going to feed the children of Israel in the wilderness again. And so what does that have to do with anything? What does this have to do with that? Well, the manna was small and it was round, and when it got hot, it melted. Now, I've joked about it being like ice cream, but it was small and round and white, and the Bible is careful to note that it lay, like it says like the hoarfrost. So when you get a real heavy frost, it's almost like snow. You could go around and you could pick it up, right? You've seen it out here when you get your first couple real big heavy frost, or whenever the dew rests heavy and that freezes over, you get a real heavy frost. I've taken pictures of it. You get some real pretty pictures around here. You get a real heavy frost and it just hangs on the trees. It rests on everything. It didn't snow, but we get such a heavy frost, it'll still turn everything white, and by about noon it's gone. What's that a picture of? That's a picture of what the Lord does for Israel with that manna coming down. It says that it's like the hoarfrost, H-O-A-R, the white frost on the ground. And the picture then is Israel during the tribulation. And that's south of the Dead Sea in Selah, otherwise otherwise known as Petra, the rock city. And back there in the holes where they like to hide, like they did in the ghettos of Warsaw, coming out at night to get their bread as God drops it on the ground, and God providing the provision daily for them, while the Antichrist tries to wipe them out. Now, I've mentioned Petra a number of times. If you can take me back to the first picture, they're not in any particular order, but just so that we can kind of see some things here, okay? That's a real common picture, but this is Petra. This is the rock city. Now, at one time in its heyday, it was a lot bigger than this, and I don't know if I've got my laser pointer or not. I don't know if that's up here. I don't know where that's been placed. I lose enough things around here, but anyway, you can kind of see up on the left corner, you can even see steps that go up around the left-hand side there. So this was, what you're seeing is nearly ruins now, but this is Petra. Go ahead and show the next one. All right, so you can see it's more than just that one rock face. There's cutouts and inlets and homes in the rock face of this entire place here. This is where Israel's going to flee to during the tribulation. All right, so you can see that there's outcroppings there, and it's been dug back into little caves and little homes, not completely unlike what you've seen with some of your kind of Incans and Aztecs and some of your Native Americans in the Southwest have done real similar to this, but go ahead and let's look at another one. All right, this is probably the most famous one. This was made famous by George Lucas whenever he did Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And of course he shows Indiana Jones going in there, and that's where he finds the Holy Grail or whatever. And so that's all been made famous, but this is actually in a canyon. And so it's such an arid place that it hasn't really received that much erosion due to rain or even wind for that matter. And so you can see the size and scope of it just by looking at these camels down below it. Go ahead.
Do you know who built it?
I'd have to look up and do some research on that as to which.
In the time of the kings?
Yeah, it'd been in the time of the kings. And so there's, just giving you an idea that it's not like it's just one thing, that this used to be an entire city. It was called the Rock City. Okay, and I believe the next one might give you a map, right? So this gives you an idea. You can see Israel. It's not in Israel, so they're actually going to flee Israel to get there to Petra. And so it's actually in Jordan. I don't know. I've not ever seen, and there probably is pictures that you can find. I just pulled those up from online where you could see how far back in there they go to see how much living space and that kind of thing there is in there. I have been told that people have even, you get Christians that go over there and check that kind of stuff out, that have left Bibles and gospel tracts and things like that in those places, in the rocks and different things. I don't know if that's true or not. Miss Brenda? The Nabateans are credited for having built it in the 3rd century. Oh, well, okay. And so that gives you an idea of about where it's located in relation to Israel and where they're going to be going. We've talked about the distance that's traveled there to a certain extent. I don't know, there might be another picture past that. I guess not. Okay, so let's just give you an idea of what all that looks like in that area. And that's where they're going to be running to. And so they're going to be coming out. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. You're seeing pictures of something that's going to be used in the future, and you're going to see, not that you and I are going to be there, but those Jews are going to be hiding in that place, and they're going to be coming out, and they're going to be collecting manna off the ground outside those rock dwellings and picking manna up off the ground and bringing it back inside, just like a kid would gather frost off the ground. And granted, in normal frost it'd melt in your hands, but I guess it's more like M&Ms. Melts in your mouth. I have no idea. I did find, and I didn't put it on there, it was an illustration of what it looked like originally in its heyday, but the text describing it was all in I don't know if it was all in Spanish or whatever it was. It was a neat illustration. I just, I was kind of in a rush. I was like, oh, I'm going to add some pictures here tonight. And that's what I was doing back in my office here just a little bit ago, is throwing up some of those things. Go ahead.
I think that valley is like 30 or 40 miles long.
Yeah. Well, yeah, well, and again, we've had the discussion. There's really no telling how many the remnant will actually be. It could be as many as would fit on a single airline plane. Go ahead. In terms of how far back in there it goes, does it say that? Oh, just wondering if it is. I have no idea how far back into those mountains those dwellings go. They might go way back in there, or it may be a matter of whenever they get there, they continue to dig them out and add to that dwelling themselves. I don't know. But that's the location. That's Petra. That's the rock city. That's where they'll be. It is an amazing thing to me that the Antichrist won't be able to find them, considering that we know right where they're going to be. But the Lord has a way of hiding what he wants hidden, right? I mean, consider, for instance, that how often have you read through a passage of Scripture and then all of a sudden the Lord shows you something? Well, if the Lord wants it hidden, he can keep it hidden. And he can certainly blind the eyes of those he doesn't want to be able to see what's there. There is a canyon there, but some of those pictures indicate that it does come out, that there is an opening there and that there's dwellings outside that opening, and just in terms of it's in the mountains. So there might be more to it than what I'm showing you. That's why I tried to find several pictures to indicate, and we'll go back through and go back, just in some of this, I can't get an idea of the scope of how many different, how close is this to some of the other pictures that we're seeing. I'm not quite sure. Like I said, I'm not.
It's all mountainous region.
Yeah, it's all, so I don't know how much is there, and I don't know how spread out it is. That looks like a completely different rock face. So, how far back in it goes, if it's interconnected, I don't know. But it's quite a deal. Somebody put some time into that, because they didn't just make, if it was you and me, I'd just make the door, right? Outside doesn't have to be fancy, right? Boy, when they made their door fancy. So there's really something to it. But, also keep in mind, those Jews have learned how to hide, in terms of going through the Holocaust and everything else, the Warsaw ghettos, and they're in Poland and all the other types of things. All right, so coming back to where we are, it says the woman fled into the wilderness where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So Israel's flight to this wilderness is evidently on the Sabbath, possibly by airplane, although it's hard to say definitively that that's the case. So that opens up a remarkable verse in Matthew chapter 24. If you go ahead and give me the next slide. Okay, Matthew chapter 24, verse 20. Matthew chapter 24, verse 20, we'll get over there, which is unknown to the people who evidently think that the passage refers to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Lord Jesus Christ says to the Jews in the tribulation, he says this in Matthew 24, 20. Let me get over there real quick. Matthew chapter 24, verse 20 says this. It says, but pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Pray that your flight, now that can refer to just fleeing. They talk about people having a fight or flight instinct. That doesn't mean that I'm either going to fight or get on a plane, right? I wish that was an option, but if it's fight or flight, most people don't have that option. Or it could mean it literally. It could mean pray that your literal flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. All right? It could be a literal flight. The context is the tribulation. What you have to remember about Christ speaking in Matthew chapter 24 is that he knew he was going to die on the cross. That wasn't ever out of the cards. But what the Jews decided to do with him after that, the people that he's talking to could very well go into the tribulation. So it makes sense for him to talk to those people about the tribulation, because everything hinges on what they decide to do in Acts chapter 7. Whether or not the things that he's saying are going to be relevant to the people he's saying them to, or they're going to be relevant to the people that are going to read about them, doesn't really matter. But what he has to say is important, and they are said to somebody. So the context is the tribulation. In spite of what any private interpretation of a certain Italian church may say on the subject, when we read flight, anybody in the 20th century automatically thinks of airplanes taking off from airports. In Israel, the airlines are grounded on the Sabbath. That's Friday night, from Friday night at 6 p.m. to Saturday at 6 p.m. That's the Sabbath. That's what a lot of people get wrong about Easter and the resurrection, is that they end up, they have Jesus Christ dying on Friday and coming up Sunday. That's not how the Jewish day works. But anyway, there's no commercial flights on the Sabbath in modern 20th century Israel. And this was a news item nationally broadcasted by CBS on August 10th, 1962, so it's a well-known thing. The indication is that if you took a flight out of Jerusalem on the Sabbath, you'd have to break the law to do it. In Revelation chapter 12, you're told that this Jewish remnant in the tribulation, they're told, or it says that they keep the commandments of God. So let a Seventh-day Adventist work on that for a little while. All right, go, if you will, back to Revelation and look at Revelation chapter 12, but look at verse 14. And by your Seventh-day Adventists, have them chew on the fact that they don't know when the Sabbath begins or ends anyway. Revelation 12:14. All right, Revelation 12:14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. All right, when you pair that up with pray that your flight not be in winter, and she's given 2 wings, you start to put wings and flight together. That she might fly into the wilderness, into her place. Her place is Petra, where she is nourished for a time, that's 1 year, and times, that's 2 more years, and half a time. So you got 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3.5 years from the face of the serpent. So if it says eagle, why don't we say that she flew away on the wings of an eagle? The Bible's literal, except when it's impossible to take it that way. Look at Revelation 12:1. Revelation 12:1, it says that there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Revelation 12:1, you know the woman is figurative because Israel is pictured as a woman. The dragon is a picture of the literal beast described literally in Job 41. The woman is a picture of a literal group of 12 tribes described literally in Genesis chapter 37 and Hosea chapter 2, and we've come across those places before. Then the 2 great wings of an eagle is a picture of something else that is literal. If this woman flees on the wings of an eagle, it's plainly not an ordinary eagle. Okay, even though if you enjoy Lord of the Rings, you know, in there, I don't know how much of you pick my pop culture references you pick up on, but if you make it to the end of the Lord of the Rings, and he throws the ring in Mount Doom, you could take the whole thing as probably a picture of tribulation, I don't know, but at the very end, these giant eagles come down and pick up Sam and Frodo and fly them out of there. Take that for what you will. Tolkien was a Christian, and a lot of his stuff is symbolic within Christianity. He may not be as overt as maybe a C.S. Lewis is with Chronicles of Narnia and all that kind of stuff. But it's plainly not an ordinary eagle because the woman is 12 tribes. You can't get 12 tribes on the wings of an eagle. But an Airbus A380 may be a different matter. I don't know. Go ahead. And that's possible. Her reference is there in Acts chapter 8, after Philip leads the Ethiopian eunuch to Christ. He's caught up by the Spirit and not seen again. He's dropped down someplace, I forget how far away it is before he's seen. I think it's probably 30 miles away. The Lord picks him up and puts him down. It could be something like that. I don't know. I don't lean as heavily on it being something like an Airbus A380, because if we go back and we look at the pictures of Petra, I don't know that there's an airstrip that you're going to get that big of a plane on the ground with. Okay, so whatever it is, I don't know. It could be that the Lord transports them. He does that himself. That may be why the Antichrist doesn't know where they went, because if it was a large aircraft, with the exception of doing something interesting with the transponders, it's still going to get picked up on radar. Granted, can the Lord do whatever he wants to do? Can he hide what he wants to hide? Sure he can. I'm not saying that he can't. I go back and forth on whether or not it's a really large aircraft or the Lord is doing something else miraculous. All right. Let's see. So if it had said airplanes, nobody in the 18th century would have understood it. So it makes sense, if it is an airplane, why the Lord wouldn't say two wings of an airplane. Although it is interesting what the Lord does say in a number of different places that does seem to indicate the Lord pointing to present day technology. I want to say it's over in Nehemiah chapter 2. Or maybe Nahum. Nahum, I think it is. I know it started with an N. Nahum, I believe. If I can find it. I'm looking for something where it talks about cars. Nahum 2:4. And there's a lot there. You can go on down and read through a lot of it. Nahum chapter 2, verse 4, and it's not up there, but the chariots shall rage in the streets. They shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They shall seem like torches. They shall run like the lightnings. And I think if you keep going on down through there, in another place, it may be in a different place. There's another place in Scripture, somebody else may think of it, where it talks about different parts that you'd see on a car. I want to say if it mentions different car parts. If it mentions the bonnet, it uses almost British terminology. What's interesting about what you read there in Nahum 2:4 is that it mentions them running like torches. Do you know what they still use the word torch in England to mean flashlight? You go and ask for a flashlight in Great Britain, they'll ask for a torch. I can't think of the place that I'm thinking of. Oh, it might be. Okay. And so I do think it's also interesting that it says that they jostle one against another in the broad ways. Well, that's what we call famous street. Famous street. In fact, most towns have most of your major cities have some place called Broadway. But if we were meaning anything other than that, I think what Nahum is seeing there is an interstate at night during rush hour traffic. Because in one way, you see all those red taillights, and another way, used to see it, I've seen pictures of it, where they would show a picture, and it looked like, it just streams of light, because it was a time-lapse photograph of an interstate. What did it look like? It looked like lightning. I mean, if you were in Nahum's day, and you were trying to describe a busy interstate at night, how would you describe a car? Right? Well, the only thing that you've ever seen move around on wheels is a chariot. And so he calls them chariots, and they're bumping up against each other. He watches, a couple accidents take place, and people are running each other off the road, and they're jostling one against another, and the lights are like torches, and the things move so fast, you wouldn't say it moved like a horse. You wouldn't even say it moved like a leopard or a cheetah. It's got to be faster than that. What's the fastest thing Nahum has ever seen move? It'd be lightning. And so he describes that. Did anybody think of that? Ezekiel 44:18, it might be. That sounds right. Let's see. Ezekiel 44:18. No, that's not what I'm looking for. And I don't know, it might mention some other, I've got a place in mind. I don't know if it mentions the axles and, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that has bonnets, but it's not using it in the context that I'm looking for. That's fine. But even just looking at Nahum 2:4 gives you the indication that the Lord is fully aware of talking about things well ahead of the time period in which it was written, things that you and I recognize. But he writes it in such a way that anybody in any time period would have an indication of, could understand what he's saying. And so the Bible is not a 21st century book. It's not even an American book, right? It is a global book for all people at all times. So it's not an American book. It's not a 2021 book. Right? It goes well past the day and age in which you live. So if you wonder, well, why don't we understand? Why don't we have a good picture of what he's talking about here, even in Revelation? Because the stuff that you're reading about is still ahead of our time. He consistently writes about things, and he's consistently thousands of years ahead of the time period in which the people who lived, who even wrote about it. So the Lord is fully capable of writing about things and writing about technologies that don't exist yet, but putting it in language that even the people in Nahum's day can read and understand, people in John's day can read and understand and pick up on. So it's not just written for a bunch of conceited nuts in the 20th century who think that God has to stoop to using their vocabulary, right? That's why I say don't mess with the book, because the Lord words things in such a way. You look at something like the NIV Bible. Maybe you didn't know this. Maybe you did. But I forget what year the NIV came out. It was in, I think it was in maybe the 60s. Is when the NIV, the New International Version, came out. Brenda's my producer. I ask a question and she looks it up. She gets it. But it wasn't, I think something like maybe 10 years later, the language that they had used to write the NIV had already become archaic, and they had to produce a new NIV. They called it the new NIV, or the NIV 76. I believe it was in 1976. They had to come out with a new NIV because the language they used in the previous NIV was already outdated and archaic, and nobody talked like that. Because the idea behind the NIV, or at least the professed idea behind it, was to put the Bible in the language of the people of that day. But that's the that's the miracle of your King James Bible, is that so much of the Bible is still written in the language that you and I use today. Talk about, it uses phrases that you still use today. You talk about barely making it out of a really bad situation. What do you say? Boy, I got out of that that came right out of a King James Bible. Right? You sit down for breakfast and you're trying to watch your calories, you're going to eat the what part of the egg? You're going to eat the white of the egg. You go through and you look at an NIV, and you know what it says in Job chapter 6, verse 6? It says that they ate the slime of the purslain. You mean, what's the slime of the purslain? You know what the King James Bible said? The white of the egg. You know what it starts talking about, and uses language that you understand. Everybody in here knows what an oak tree is. Do you know what a terebinth tree is? Well, that's what the NIV replaces it with. You go down to the lumber yard, go ahead and get you a 2x4 terebinth. See if they look at you funny. Now you ask, I want a nice, 2x6 oak. I don't know if they can get it for you or not. I'm guessing maybe they could. There's so much of it. In fact, I've got books over there in my library of just phrasing and all kinds of different things. You might be able to find it over there in Brother Gipp's Understandable History of the Bible. I think he may even reference just the common language that's used in the King James Bible that you and I still use today. And so that Bible's ahead of its time, and you won't get ahead of it. People will try to get ahead of it, and then before they know it, the language that they've used is already archaic. The Lord has preserved these words. All right. So people in other centuries had to read this book as well as you. And there isn't anybody from Adam to the second coming of Jesus Christ who doesn't know what an eagle is. Suppose he had written, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great Airbus A380. Now, who before 2007 would have known what he was talking about? He would have been hidden from them, would have been kept from them. They couldn't. I don't have any idea what it is. What is that? What is A380? That's nothing. I can't get anything behind that. You see, the Bible is written so you can understand it, and I realize that scientists write so that people can't understand them. So people will think that they're real bright. Now, maybe you don't believe that. Whenever I was finishing up my teaching degree, I did it online. I had to write a lot of papers. I learned a trick. All right, you want to write a paper, you want to write a 10-page paper in about 3 hours, I'll tell you how to do it. All right, you do 2 things. When you go to do your research, you look up a document, and maybe it's written in educationese. All right, here's what you do. You take exactly what that guy said, and you write it so somebody can understand it. And they'll never catch you for plagiarism. They can't. And you say, well, what do you do if somebody wrote something real simple? All right, this is the second trick. You take something that was written real simple, and you make it so complicated nobody can understand what it is you're saying. And I'll tell you, that's how you get your word count up. And it ticked Caitlin off because I could write a 5-page paper in about an hour and a half, and then it would come back, and I'd get the response from the instructor, oh, that was a great paper. I was like, I learned that you could take a sentence and make a paragraph. And that's what a lot of what I call educationese is. It's taking something simple and making it so complicated and using so many $10 words, nobody has a clue what you're talking about. And I'd read through some of these research papers, and every other line, sometimes multiple times in the same sentence, there would be a reference to something else. There were just all these numbers and everything. Every line had a reference to something else. You couldn't understand what they were saying. They weren't saying anything most of the times. There was nothing to get out of it, but somebody reads that, and you know what they begin to think, falsely? I'm stupid. I'm not smart enough to know this. And that same thing happens within theological circles, is writing things up in such a way that the average person can't understand it, so they assume that Dr. So-and-so who stands behind the pulpit, and I'm not saying all doctors or every theological doctor there is a bad guy, but anytime you start to get an Alexandrian mindset, which is to say, you need to come to me and I'll tell you what it says. No, that's not how the Lord works it out. Like I preached the other Sunday morning, I'm glad that the Lord put it right where I could get it. Because you even hear Jesus Christ say, I'm glad that you didn't give it to the high and lofty folks. I'm glad you put it right down here where the average person could get truth. And the problem is that he puts it so low that the high and lofty people that are looking for it way up on the shelf never find it. Because it's not up there, it's down here. It's down here where you can get it. And so he does that, the wings of a great eagle. Everybody in here knows what an eagle is. Now, I sat on a bus one time with some kindergartners out here. This is whenever I was driving bus. It was one of my favorite moments in driving a school bus. We're out there on 129 North, and there was a bunch of buzzards take off right off of, right there next to somebody's house. And all these little kindergartners, they got so excited. And they started yelling, "Vulture, vulture, vulture." And one little boy, you probably know him if I said his name, I won't embarrass him, but he got just real excited, but he couldn't get it out, and he said, it's a, and by this time everybody has said vulture. He's heard the word vulture. And he goes, it's a, and he's the last person to speak, "It's a bald eagle." So maybe not everybody knows what an eagle is, but the Lord does put truth where you can get it. And, if he had written it differently, the Bible is written so that you can understand, and other people put it where you can't get it, but God doesn't do that. God wrote in plain language so that any fool can understand it, and if he'll just believe it, that's the big part, is believe what you read. All this going to the Greek and adding Latin and Greek roots on words to sell them like a new kind of soap may fool some folks. It fools a lot of folks because the idea is I'm going to stand behind the pulpit and make you feel stupid. And that's a jerk that'll do that. But you're dealing with God. You're dealing with the Holy Spirit here in the Bible. And the Lord doesn't want to make you feel stupid. He says, here it is. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to understand everything. He said, you've got to work for it. Study to show thyself a workman. So don't assume that you don't understand it because you're too dumb. You may just not have worked for it enough. The Bible is it's a gold mine. But the picture is of a miner going in and digging for it, and that's work. I mean, you get that pick out, and you're hitting that thing against stone and beating it, and you're getting these little chunks, and sometimes there's gold in there and sometimes there's not. But you know what? If you want to dig the gold out of that mine, you're going to have to keep working for it. In the passage, it says that the woman, that's identified as Israel, goes on two wings of a great eagle. The woman is identified as Israel. The two wings of a great eagle are unidentified. I guess you could put it this way, whatever they get out on, as of yet, is an unidentified flying object. They make it out on a UFO, I don't know. But indicated as flight on the Sabbath in Matthew 24. And I'm not going to say positively that it'll be airplanes, but since the whole event takes place in the 20th century, the probability could be so great that you wouldn't stretch your imagination to believe it. Now, maybe it's a different kind of aircraft. Some of the stuff that they're doing right now with aircraft, if you've ever seen an Osprey, I don't know how many of you know what an Osprey is, but it takes off like a helicopter and flies like a plane. And that's becoming a more and more abundant technology. Now, could they superimpose that on something like an aircraft carrier? I don't know. You give them enough time, maybe that's what the future looks like. Maybe it looks like an airline aircraft that takes off vertically and lands vertically. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them. You talk about things that have happened within just the field of aeronautics. In December 17th, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, South Carolina, two men took off on an airplane that flew 120 feet. 1903. 66 years later, a man put his foot on the moon. 66 years later. That means that there were people that read in the newspaper that Orville and Wilbur Wright had taken off for the first recorded flight, and then watched Neil Armstrong land on the moon in their lifetime. That's how far that technology progressed in less than 70 years. What we're talking about here, you and I may not have any idea yet. Now, I think that we're getting real close to this stuff, so if it's going to come up, it's probably going to come up pretty quick. And so I keep an eye out for this stuff. I like aeronautics, and I like airplanes, and I like all that kind of stuff, so I'm interested to see what's going on out there. And that's one field that's taking off, which is vertical flight. All right, we better stop there, going over here a little bit on time. We'll pick up with some of this. We'll look at some things in Revelation 12, 15 next time. Any questions, comments there? All right, like I said, we've got some Halloween tracts back there. Just pick them up, take them, do whatever you want with them. If you want to hand them out, great. If not, we'll keep them here for a future year or whatever. So they won't go, won't expire. So, all right, we'll close there and go do some praying.